in the summer of 1997. A 9-year-old girl named Callie Anne Morrow walked out of her family's front door in Harlan Creek, Tennessee, carrying a yellow plastic bucket and a fishing pole. Her grandfather had given her for Christmas. She was going to the pond at the edge of the Whitfield property, just 3 houses down. She had done it 100 times before. She was never seen again. For the family she left behind, the next 26 years would become a quiet, relentless kind of suffering. The kind that doesn't make the evening news after the first few months. The kind that settles into a house and never fully leaves. And the answer to what happened to Callie Anne Morrow on that July afternoon would remain hidden for more than 2 decades, buried inside something no one thought to look for. Until the very end. Harlan Creek sits in the northeastern corner of Tennessee, about 40 miles southeast of Knoxville, tucked between 2 long ridges that turn gold every October. Most people who live there have lived there their whole lives, and most of their parents did too. The town had a population of just under 4,000 people in 1997. It had a grain elevator, 2 churches, a diner called Patsy's that had been open since 1961, and a volunteer fire department whose parking lot doubled as the venue for the town's 4th of July celebration every year. It was exactly the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked, where children rode their bicycles until the streetlights came on, where neighbors knew each other's vehicles by sound and would wave from the porch without even looking up. It was, by every measure, a safe place to raise a family. Everyone in Harlan Creek believed that, and for a very long time, nothing had happened to prove them wrong. That changed on July 14th, 1997. Callie Anne Morrow was born on March 3rd, 1988. The second child and only daughter of Dale and Renee Morrow. She was a small girl for her age, with brown eyes and a gap between her front teeth that her mother always said gave her smile its character. She kept her dark hair in 2 braids most days because she couldn't stand it falling in her face when she was busy, and Callie was almost always busy. She was the kind of child who collected things: smooth river stones, bottle caps, feathers she found in the yard. She kept them in shoeboxes stacked under her bed and could tell you exactly where each one came from. She had a particular fondness for anything she found. Near water, Callie loved fishing with a seriousness that surprised adults. She could identify the common freshwater species of eastern Tennessee by the age of 7. She knew what time of day the bass were most likely to bite, and she had opinions about which bait worked best in which season. Opinions she would share whether or not you asked for them. Her grandfather, Earl Morrow, had taught her everything she knew about fishing, and she credited him for it freely and often. She was finishing 3rd grade at Harlan Creek Elementary that spring. Her teacher, a woman named Mrs. Patricia Aldrich, would later tell investigators that Callie was one of those students who made teaching feel worthwhile. Curious, funny, a little stubborn sometimes, but never mean about it. She had 3 close friends she walked home with on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She was learning to play the recorder badly, and she practiced every evening without being asked. She was 9 years old. She had plans. She wanted to one day work with animals or fish or both. She wasn't sure yet exactly how, but she was certain she would figure it out. There was one more thing about Callie that people who knew her always mentioned when they spoke of her later. She was the kind of child who noticed people, not in a shy, watchful way, but in a warm way. She noticed when someone seemed sad. She would bring her grandfather an extra cookie from her lunch without being asked. simply because she had decided he looked like he needed one. Her mother kept a drawing Callie had made at age 6, a wobbly crayon portrait of Renee with the caption, "My mum is the best cooker in the world," written in careful block letters along the bottom. Renee had it framed. It hung in the kitchen on Sycamore Lane for the next 26 years. Through everything that followed, she was not a perfect child. She could be stubborn to the point of maddening. She once refused to apologize to Brandon for an entire week over a dispute about a borrowed bicycle. She had a temper when she felt something was unfair, and she had firm opinions about what counted as fair. But the people who loved her, and there were many, remembered her as someone who made the world feel more interesting than it had before she entered a room. Dale Morrow worked as a line supervisor at a furniture manufacturing plant just outside of town. He had been there for 11 years. He was quiet and steady in the way that people who work with their hands sometimes are not, unfriendly, but careful with his words, someone who preferred action to conversation. He coached his son's Little League team in the spring, and he took both his children fishing at least twice a month when the weather allowed. Renee Morrow worked part-time at the school district's administrative office, filing records and managing correspondence. She was the more talkative of the two parents, the one who knew the neighbors, who organized the street's Christmas card exchange, who remembered everyone's birthdays. She had grown up in Harlan Creek herself, the daughter of a hardware store owner. She knew almost every family in town by name. Their son, Brandon, was 12 in the summer of 1997. He and Callie had the ordinary relationship of siblings close in age. They bickered over the television, competed for their parents' attention, and were fiercely protective of each other the moment anyone from outside. The family said a crossword. The Morrows lived in a yellow house on Sycamore Lane. They had a garden in the back and a covered porch out front. On summer evenings, Dale and Renee would sit out there after dinner while the kids played in the yard. It was a comfortable life. Not wealthy, but solid. The kind of life that feels, from the inside, like it will simply continue. July 14th, 1997, was a Monday. School was out for the summer. The morning had started normally. Renee made eggs and toast. Dale left for work at 6:30. Brandon was going to spend the day at a friend's house down the road. Callie had announced at breakfast that she intended to fish at the Whitfield pond, which was what she called the small privately owned pond at the far edge of the Whitfield family's property. The Whitfields, an older couple named Harold and June, had long ago given informal permission for neighborhood children to fish there, provided they didn't disturb the vegetable garden along the eastern bank. Renee asked Callie to wait until after lunch. Callie agreed, with minimal negotiation. After lunch, at approximately 12:50 in the afternoon, Callie put on her sneakers, collected her yellow bucket and her fishing pole from the garage, and told her mother she was heading to the pond. Renee reminded her to be back by 4 o'clock. Callie said she would. 3 neighbors on Sycamore Lane and the adjacent Birch Road would later confirm that they saw Callie walking toward the Whitfield property that afternoon. A woman named Dorothy Fitch, who was trimming her hedges at the time, said she waved at Callie and Callie waved back. Mrs. Fitch estimated the time at approximately 1:15 in the afternoon. That was the last confirmed sighting of Callie Anne Morrow when 4 o'clock came and Callie had not returned. Renee wasn't yet alarmed. Children lost track of time. She waited another 15 minutes before walking down the road herself. The Whitfield pond was still and empty. The only sign that anyone had been there was a single small sneaker print in the mud near the water's edge. There was no yellow bucket. There was no fishing pole. There was no Callie dot at 4:02 in the afternoon. Renee Morrow called the Harlan Creek Sheriff's Department. The panic that follows the realization that a child is missing is unlike almost any other human experience. It has a specific texture to it. Disbelief layered over dread, layered over the desperate, almost physical need to simply find them. Renee Morrow would later describe the first hours as feeling like moving through water, like everything was slowed down and too loud at the same time. Sheriff's deputies arrived at the Morrow home within 20 minutes. Within the hour, a search was underway across the Whitfield property and the surrounding fields and tree lines. Neighbors on Sycamore Lane and Birch Road came out without being asked. By 6 in the evening, more than 60 people were walking the fields in a grid pattern, calling Callie's name. Dale Morrow got the call at his plant and drove home in under 15 minutes. He would later say that the drive was the longest of his life, and that he already knew, somewhere underneath all the hope, that something was seriously wrong. Brandon was called back from his friend's house. He arrived home to find his front yard filling with neighbors and strangers. A deputy met him at the door and brought him inside. Brandon would later say that he sat on the couch for what felt like hours, watching the door, certain that Callie was about to walk through it, and be annoyed that everyone was making such a fuss. The Whitfield property was searched first, and then the surrounding woods to the north and east. Men from the fire department walked in paired lines through the tall grass of an adjacent field, their flashlights sweeping low against the ground. Women from the neighborhood organized themselves into a group and moved through a stretch of scrubland to the south. Nobody coordinated them, they simply knew what to do, in the way that people in small towns sometimes do, shaped by generations of pulling together when something goes wrong. Pastor Jim Alderman from First Baptist opened the church that evening and set up urns of coffee for the searchers coming in and out. He said very little. He was simply present. It was what was needed. Canine units arrived that evening from Knoxville. The dogs tracked Callie's scent from the mud near the pond through a stand of trees at the northern edge of the Whitfield property, and then to a gravel access road used by farm equipment. The trail ended there, cold, as though Callie had simply stopped at that gravel road and ceased to exist. Tennessee Bureau of Investigation helicopter swept the area with thermal equipment as darkness fell. They found nothing. By midnight, every accessible acre within a mile and a half of the Whitfield pond had been searched. Callie Anne Morrow was not found. The investigation that followed was the largest in Harlan Creek's recent history. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation took over as the lead agency within 48 hours. Agents began conducting interviews immediately with neighbors, with the Whitfields, with anyone who had been in the area on the afternoon of July 14th. Harold and June Whitfield were interviewed extensively. They had been at home all afternoon. June had been in the kitchen. Harold had been working in his woodshop at the rear of the property. Neither had seen nor heard anything unusual. Both were considered cooperating witnesses with no indication of involvement. Investigators did not consider them suspects. Investigators turned their attention to a man named Gary Sutton, a 41-year-old who lived about a mile from the Whitfield property and had a prior conviction for trespassing and disorderly conduct. He had been seen by 2 different witnesses driving slowly along Birch Road on the afternoon of the disappearance. Gary Sutton was interviewed at length. His vehicle was searched and his property was examined. nothing connected him to Callie. He was not charged. A partial footprint was found on the gravel access road, a boot print, men's size 10 or 11, pressed into a soft patch of earth at the road's edge. It was photographed and preserved. At the time, investigators had no matching sample to compare it to. Callie's yellow bucket was found 6 days after the disappearance, in a drainage ditch approximately a quarter-mile from the access road. It was empty. There were no fingerprints on it beyond Callie's own. The fishing pole was never recovered. The media coverage was significant in the first 2 weeks. Television crews from Knoxville came out. The story ran in papers across the state. A tip line was established and received hundreds of calls in the first month, most of which led nowhere. One caller reported seeing a girl matching Callie's description in a gas station in Cookeville, about 150 miles to the west. Investigators looked into it. It was a different child at the time. Nobody realized how important one particular detail would eventually become, a detail so small that it hadn't been formally noted in any of the early reports. One of the neighbors, a retired school teacher named Marvin Good, who lived at the corner of Birch Road and the access road, had mentioned to a deputy in passing that he thought he'd seen a truck he didn't recognize parked on the access road around midday on July 14th. He described it as a dark blue or green pickup. Older model, possibly with something written on the door. He couldn't be sure. He hadn't thought much of it at the time. Farmers used that road. It wasn't unusual. The deputy noted it briefly in a supplemental report. It was not followed up on directly. Marvin Good would not be interviewed formally for another 9 months. What investigators discovered next would change the nature of the case entirely, but it would take years for that change to be understood. The weeks turned into months. The months turned into a year. Renee Morrow kept a binder on the kitchen counter. In it, she stored every newspaper article, every tip she had received, every name she had written down from conversations with neighbors who remembered something they hadn't mentioned before. She called the TBI case agent every 2 weeks. For the first year, he called her back reliably. After that, the calls became less frequent. The caseload was heavy. The leads had gone cold. Dale Morrow returned to work 8 weeks after Callie disappeared. He had to. The bills did not pause. He drove to and from the plant each day in near total silence. People at work were kind, in the way people are kind when they don't know what to say. They stopped mentioning it after a while, and Dale understood that. He didn't blame them. He just learned to carry it quietly. Brandon, 13 by the time school resumed that fall, went back to Harlan Creek Middle School. His teachers were told about the family's situation. He was a good student, but quieter than he had been. Some of the other kids didn't quite know how to treat him, whether to pretend everything was normal or to acknowledge the enormous thing that had happened. Most chose normal. Brandon let them. Every year, on July 14th, Renee placed a notice in the Harlan Creek Courier, a photograph of Callie, a brief message asking anyone with information to come forward. She never stopped. The anniversaries had their own particular weight. The first anniversary was covered by the Knoxville paper, which ran a follow-up story and reignited a brief round of tips to the hotline. The second anniversary passed more quietly. By the third and fourth, the community had, in the way that communities must, begun to resume its ordinary rhythm. Life in Harlan Creek did not stop. Weddings happened. Babies were born. The furniture plant hired new workers. Patsy's Diner remodeled its back dining room. The world moved forward with its usual indifference to grief. But on Sycamore Lane, July 14th was its own kind of day. Dale would take the morning off work without discussing it. Renee would spend part of the morning sitting with Callie's photo albums on the kitchen table. Brandon, even as he got older and moved to an apartment in Knoxville for college and then for work, would call home that morning, always. Without fail, the three of them would speak briefly and say very little. That was enough. The room that had been Callie's was kept largely as it had been. Renee changed the bedsheets occasionally, washed the curtains, dusted the shoeboxes under the bed. She did not turn the room into a shrine, and she did not repurpose it into something else. It remained a child's bedroom, as if the house itself were keeping space. In 2001, for years after the disappearance, the case was officially designated as cold by the TBI, though it remained technically open. A new investigator was assigned to review the file when the old one retired. He found the note about Marvin Good and the truck and finally scheduled a formal interview. Marvin Good, now 73, was still living on Birch Road. His memory of the truck had not changed. Dark blue or green. Older model. Something on the door. He thought it might have had a business logo, but he wasn't certain. He was sorry he couldn't remember more. The description was added to the official record. It remained there, unmatched, for another 18 years. She had been 9 years old when she wrote it. The letter did not indicate how or when it had come into Roy Devers's possession. It did not explain what had ultimately happened to Callie. That question, the one the family had lived with for years, by the time the case was reopened, would take additional investigation to approach what investigators established through the search of Devers's residence, through financial and travel records, and through the piecing together of his movements in the months following Callie's disappearance, was a partial picture. Partial, but devastating. Devers had been in the area on July 14, 1997. Records from a fuel purchase at a gas station in a neighboring county placed him near Harlan Creek that afternoon. He had not been employed by Clara Hutchins for 2 weeks, but he had kept a spare key to one of her trucks, a detail she hadn't known and hadn't thought to mention, because she hadn't known it herself until investigators pressed the question. He had used that truck on the day of the disappearance. Cell phone records did not exist in their current form in 1997, and there was no digital trail of the kind investigators would have today. But a motel receipt found among documents in a storage unit linked to Devers's name placed him at a motel in a county in southwestern Virginia in the days following Callie's disappearance. Beyond that, the trail became harder to follow. Devers had moved frequently in the years after 1997 and before his 2003 arrest in Kentucky. The physical evidence recovered from his Claiborne County home established a connection to Callie. It did not tell investigators everything they needed to know. Roy Devers was arrested at his residence in May 2015. He was charged with aggravated kidnapping and held without bail. He did not cooperate with investigators. He did not speak about Callie. He did not say where she had gone or what had happened to her. He would continue, in the months that followed, to maintain silence on that question. The case against Roy Devers went to trial in 2017 in Knox County, Tennessee. The prosecution built its case on the physical evidence, the letter, the DNA match, the objects in the lockbox, consistent with items Callie had been known to collect, the fuel receipt, the motel records, the testimony of Clara Hutchins about the truck and the spare key, The prosecution also presented testimony from a forensic handwriting expert, from the TBI's DNA laboratory director, and from the investigator who had first connected Devers' name in the 1997 supplemental file to the Kentucky conviction. Each witness was careful and methodical. The picture they assembled was not complete, but it was coherent. It pointed, without ambiguity, to Roy Devers. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial and that 20 years of degradation made absolute certainty impossible. The jury, 8 women and 4 men, drawn from Knox County, deliberated for 4 days. They asked to review the DNA report twice. They asked to have the letter described in summary once more. They did not ask questions that suggested confusion. They asked questions that suggested they were being thorough. They returned a verdict of guilty on 2 counts. When the verdict was read, Renee Morrow closed her eyes for a moment. Then she opened them. She did not cry in the courtroom. People who were there said she looked like someone who had been holding something very heavy for a very long time, and who had just been told she could set it down, but wasn't quite sure yet how to let go. Roy Devers was sentenced to 40 years in prison. He would be 85 before he was eligible for parole. For most practical purposes, it was a life sentence. He has never said what happened to Callie Anne Morrow after July 14, 1997. He has never indicated where she went. He has never answered the question that the Morrow family has carried for more than 2 decades. The investigation into Callie's fate remains technically open. The TBI has not closed that portion of the case. The question of what happened to her, whether she survived, for how long and where, has not been answered publicly, and may never be answered in a way that provides the closure her family would need. What the family does know is this: their daughter was taken by someone who had watched and waited and chosen a moment. She had been afraid and she had missed them, and she had written them a letter. That letter, folded 3 times, had survived in a metal box for 18 years. It had been recovered. It had been read. Her handwriting had been confirmed. Her DNA had been confirmed. Callie Anne Morrow had existed, fully and completely, in the hours and days after she disappeared. She had thought of her parents. She had been real in the months following the verdict. Renee Morrow gave a single interview to a journalist from the Knoxville newspaper. She sat at her kitchen table, the same house on Sycamore Lane, though the garden had changed and the porch furniture was different, and she spoke carefully. She said that justice and answers were not the same thing. She said that she was grateful for the people who had never stopped, for Sandra Oak, who had read the file carefully, for the TBI agents who had taken the case back seriously, for Mrs. Aldrich, who had kept Callie's school papers for nearly 20 years without knowing why. She said that Marvin Good had died in 2008, and that she wished he had lived to know that his memory of the truck had mattered. She said that Callie would have been 31 years old at the time of the trial. She said she sometimes thought about what Callie would have been like at 31. She thought she probably would have been stubborn and funny, and still too opinionated about fishing. She said that she still kept the binder on the kitchen counter, not because there was more to file, but because she wasn't ready to put it away. Dale Morrow did not give interviews. He attended every day of the trial, and he sat very still. After the verdict was read, witnesses said he sat for a long moment without moving, and then he stood and walked outside. A deputy who knew the family found him standing in the parking lot, looking at nothing in particular. The deputy asked if he was all right. Dale said he wasn't sure yet, but that he thought he might be. Eventually, Brandon Morrow became, in the years following the trial, an advocate for cold case legislation in Tennessee. He worked with state legislators to push for changes in how cold cases involving children were reviewed and resourced. He gave testimony before a state committee in 2019. He cited his sister's case. He was precise and clear and did not waver. The small town of Harlan Creek, where people had once left their doors unlocked and let their children ride bikes until the streetlights came on, had changed in some ways and stayed the same in others. The diner was still there. The churches were still there. But parents in Harlan Creek no longer sent their children to the pond alone. That particular innocence did not return. It rarely does, once it has been lost. In 2009, 12 years after Callie disappeared, Renee Morrow was diagnosed with breast cancer. She underwent treatment and she recovered. But the illness changed her in the way serious illness sometimes does. It made her more urgent about the things she hadn't finished. She began writing letters. She wrote to the TBI. She wrote to the FBI. She wrote to a non-profit organization that specialized in cold case advocacy. She wrote to a journalist in Knoxville who had covered cold cases before. She was polite in all of her letters and precise, and she included copies of documents she had collected over the years. She asked each recipient to take another look. Some responded. Most did not result in new leads, but one of those letters eventually landed in the hands of a woman named Sandra Okafor, a retired forensic document examiner who volunteered with a cold case review group based in Nashville. Sandra Okafor had spent 30 years working with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation, and she had a particular interest in cases involving children. She agreed to take a fresh look at the Callie Morrow file in 2015. Sandra Okafor formally requested the complete case file from the TBI. She spent 4 months reading it. She made notes on a legal pad. She identified 3 things she wanted to look at more closely. The first was the boot print from the access road. The second was the timeline discrepancy between Marvin Good's statement about the truck and the deputy's original report. The third was a name that appeared once, briefly, in a supplemental interview from August 1997, a name that had never been followed up on. The name belonged to a man named Roy Devers. Roy Devers had been mentioned by a woman named Clara Hutchins, who ran a small landscaping business out of Harlan Creek. She had been interviewed in August 1997 because her truck had been seen on the access road in the weeks before Callie's disappearance. She did occasional maintenance on the Whitfield property's grounds. In her interview, she mentioned that she had recently let go of a part-time worker, a man named Roy Devers, who had been difficult and unreliable. She mentioned him only in passing. The interviewing agent noted the name but did not follow up. Roy Devers had no criminal record in Tennessee in 1997. That was why the name had been passed over. But when Sandra Okafor searched the name in 2015, she found something that made her hand go still. Roy Devers had been convicted in 2003 in the state of Kentucky for the abduction of a minor. He had served 8 years of a 12-year sentence. He had been released in 2011 and had relocated to a county in eastern Tennessee, less than 30 miles from Harlan Creek. Sandra Okafor called the TBI the next morning. If you enjoy stories like this and want to hear more mysteries from around the world, consider subscribing to the channel. It helps more than you might think, and there are many more stories to come. The TBI reopened the Callie Morrow case in the spring of 2015. Investigators located Roy Devers at an address in Claiborne County, Tennessee. He was 59 years old, He was living alone in a rented house at the end of a rural road. He worked part-time at a farm supply store. His neighbors described him as quiet and kept to himself. Investigators did not approach Devers immediately. They wanted to build what they had before they moved. They first went back to Clara Hutchins, now in her mid-60s, still living in Harlan Creek. She remembered Roy Devers clearly. She described him as someone who had worked for her for about 5 months in the spring and early summer of 1997. She said he had driven a dark green pickup truck, older model. Late 1980s, she said her company name had been painted on the door, in black lettering. Investigators felt the air go out of the room. Dark green pickup, older model, something written on the door. Marvin Good's description, 18 years later, had just matched. Clara Hutchins confirmed that Roy Devers would have had legitimate reason to be on the access road near the Whitfield property in the weeks before Callie's disappearance. She did not know if he had been there on July 14th specifically. She had let him go in late June 1997, approximately 2 weeks before Callie disappeared. His access to the truck would have ended with his employment, unless he had kept a key, unless he had gone back. That was what investigators needed to establish. They pulled Devers's known associates from his 2003 Kentucky conviction. They tracked down the original case file from that prosecution. They found something in it that made the Tennessee case agents go very quiet. In the Kentucky case, Devers had followed a pattern. He had identified children in rural areas who were frequently alone. He had used a vehicle, in that case, a van borrowed from a relative, to approach them. He had targeted locations near water. Near water, investigators obtained a warrant to search Roy Devers's Claiborne County residence. They executed the search on a Tuesday morning in May 2015. Inside the house, they found what they expected: minimal belongings, sparse furnishings, the unremarkable interior of a man who had spent years trying not to be noticed. But in a metal lockbox beneath the bed, they found something they had not expected. They found a collection of small objects: stones, a bottle cap, a single dried feather, and they found a letter. It was handwritten, on a single sheet of lined notebook paper, folded 3 times. It had never been mailed. It was addressed, in careful printed letters, to Mum and Dad. It was signed, at the bottom, Callie. The letter was immediately secured and sent to the TBI's forensic laboratory in Nashville. Handwriting analysis was ordered. DNA analysis from the paper and the envelope was ordered. The results took 6 weeks. The handwriting was consistent with samples from Callie Anne Morrow's school papers, preserved by her former teacher, Mrs. Aldrich, who had never thrown them away. The DNA on the letter, from a faint trace on the edge of the paper, consistent with the moisture left when folding, matched a DNA profile from a hairbrush recovered from Callie's bedroom in 1997 and preserved in evidence storage. The letter had been written by Callie Anne Morrow. The content of the letter was not released in full to the public. Investigators shared its general nature with the Morrow family first. In a private meeting at the TBI's Knoxville field office, Renee Morrow, now 58 years old, sat across from the case agent and listened. Dale, 61, sat beside her. Brandon, now 30, held his mother's hand. What the letter contained, in general terms, was this: Callie had written it at some point after her disappearance. She described being kept in a place she did not recognize. She said she was not hurt, but that she was afraid. She said she had hidden the letter inside, something she hoped would be found. She said she missed her parents. She said she was sorry she hadn't come home by 4 o'clock. The case of Callie Anne Morrow is remembered now as one of the reasons Tennessee strengthened its cold case review protocols in the late 2010s. Her name is cited in the legislation. Her school photograph, the one her mother used in the annual courier notice, the one with the braids and the gap-toothed smile, has been reproduced in briefings and presentations given to investigators across the state. She is also remembered simply as Callie, 9 years old, smooth river stones and bottle caps and feathers, too stubborn and too curious and too full of plans for a single summer afternoon to contain her. There are cases that shake a community and then fade, and there are cases that settle into a place permanently, that become part of how a town understands itself and its own history. Callie Morrow's case is the latter kind. The Whitfield pond is still there, at the edge of what was once the Whitfield property. Harold and June Whitfield have both since passed. The property changed hands twice. The pond is smaller than it used to be, or maybe it only seems that way. People who grew up in Harlan Creek in the late 90s still remember the summer Callie went missing. They remember the search. They remember the silence that fell over the town in the weeks that followed. Some of them remember being children at the time, and their parents suddenly not letting them play outside alone. They understand now, as adults, what their parents were afraid of. The letter Callie wrote, folded 3 times, addressed to her mother and father, is preserved in evidence storage. The Morrow family was given the opportunity to have a copy made. Renee accepted. She has never said publicly what she did with it. That is hers to keep. The full truth of what happened to Callie Anne Morrow in the hours and days after July 14th, 1997, may never be publicly known. Roy Devers has not spoken. The investigation has not produced evidence sufficient to answer every question. There is a gap in the record that no verdict can completely fill. But here is what is known. A 9-year-old girl walked down a summer road with a yellow bucket and a fishing pole, and she was taken by someone who had no right to take her. She was frightened, and she was brave enough to write a letter. That letter survived. Her parents survived. The people who loved her carried the weight of not knowing for more than 2 decades, and they never fully put it down. The investigation that finally produced answers was not fast. It was not clean. It depended on a retired forensic examiner who gave her time voluntarily, on a neighbor's uncertain memory of a truck's color, on a school teacher who had kept a child's papers in a box for nearly 2 decades, on a cold file that someone finally agreed to open again. It depended, too, on Renee Morrow, who kept writing letters long after most people would have stopped, who kept placing that photograph in the local paper every July, who refused, across decades of silence, to let her daughter become a name in an archive. That refusal mattered. In the end, it mattered enormously. There are other files in other archives, other names on other lists, other families sitting at kitchen tables with binders full of newspaper clippings, making their calls and writing their letters and waiting, each one of them waiting for the day that someone reads the file, carefully enough to see what others missed. For Callie Anne Morrow, that day finally came. For some of the others, it has not come yet, but it can. And perhaps that is what the Callie Morrow case ultimately teaches. Not only about the failures of early investigations, not only about the importance of preserving evidence and following every thread, no matter how thin, but about the stubborn, unglamorous, daily act of refusing to forget. Renee Morrow did not have the resources of a law enforcement agency. She did not have forensic expertise or legal authority. She had a binder and a telephone and the willingness to keep making calls. She had the discipline to place the same photograph in the same paper, year after year, knowing that most years it would produce nothing. And in the end, that consistency, that refusal, helped create the conditions under which Sandra Okafor found the file, read it carefully, and saw a name that others had passed over. There is no monument to Callie Anne Morrow in Harlan Creek. There is no memorial bench by the Whitfield pond. The town does not mark the date publicly, but the people who were children in Harlan Creek in 1997 carry her with them the way people carry the first time they understood that the world was not always safe. That understanding, once it arrives, does not leave. Callie loved smooth stones and bottle caps and feathers. She loved fishing in the early morning when the light came flat across the water. She loved her grandfather and her mother and went in the way of younger siblings everywhere. She loved her brother too, even when she wouldn't admit it. She was 9 years old. She deserved a whole life,